At my grandmother's 80th birthday party, my family once again treated my sister like the golden child while I stood quietly on the sidelines. Then one casual comment about my new Manhattan penthouse changed the entire room. Wine was thrown, accusations exploded, and an uncle finally said what no one ever admitted out loud. That night exposed years of favoritism and proved that the wrong kid was never actually wrong at all. The crystal chandelier in the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel scattered light like fractured diamonds across a sea of familiar, unfamiliar, and half-familiar faces. It was a scene of orchestrated opulence, a testament to my grandmother's 80 years of life, but more so, to my family's desperate need to project an image of unified, gleaming success. The air hummed with the sound of a string quartet playing Vivaldi, the clink of fine china, and the low, self-congratulatory murmur of people who believe their presence is a gift. I stood near a potted fern that cost more than my first year's college textbooks, feeling like a ghost in my own family's celebration. My uniform, a simple, well-tailored navy sheath dress I'd bought on final sale. My armor. My sister, Chloe, orbited the room in a cloud of ivory tulle and entitlement, her dress a custom designer piece my parents had financed as an early birthday gift. Even though her birthday was 6 months away, she was holding court by the champagne fountain, her laughter a bright, piercing bell that commanded attention. Our mother, Evelyn, trailed slightly behind her, beaming as if Chloe were conducting the quartet herself, adjusting a stray curl on Chloe's perfect blonde head with a reverence usually reserved for holy relics. This was the ecosystem I had navigated for 28 years. Chloe was the sun, and our family, my parents, our aunts and uncles, even distant cousins, were planets in her gravitational pull. I was a distant, icy rock in the outer darkness, occasionally noticed when my trajectory inconveniently crossed theirs. The mythology was simple and unchallenged. Chloe was the creative, sensitive, destined for greatness star. I was the pragmatic, steady, reliable moon. No one ever questioned why the star required constant financial fuel to keep burning, or why the moon was expected to provide gravitational stability without ever reflecting any light of its own. My journey to this moment, to this fern, to the secret that sat in my chest like a live coal, began not in Manhattan, but in the perpetually beige suburb of my childhood. Our house was a shrine to Chloe's potential. The living room walls were a gallery of her achievements. First-place ribbons for dance competitions she'd begged to quit after a month, framed certificates for gifted programs, endless school portraits where she smiled with the confidence of someone who knew the camera loved her. My own accomplishments, the spelling bee trophy, the perfect score on the state math exam, the scholarship offer, were relegated to the kitchen bulletin board, eventually buried under grocery lists and pizza coupons. The disparity wasn't just decorative. It was financial, emotional, systemic. When Chloe decided at 16 that she needed a personal studio to nurture her artistic soul, my father converted the garage, soundproofing it, and installing expensive lighting. My request for a new graphing calculator for my advanced calculus class was met with a sigh and "We'll see, Alex. Money is tight right now." Chloe's summer intensive at the arts camp is quite a commitment. The camp cost $5,000. The calculator was $99. I learned the language of lack early. I learned to mend my own clothes, to tutor other kids for pocket money, to smile and say, "It's okay," when my parents missed my school plays because they were at Chloe's recitals. I learned that my needs were complications, and my successes were pleasant surprises that required no further investment. Chloe's dreams were family projects. Mine were solitary pursuits. This conditioning followed me to college. Chloe was accepted into a prestigious, outrageously expensive private art school in the city. The acceptance letter was framed. My full-ride scholarship to a state university for engineering was acknowledged with a pat on the back and "That's great, honey. Very sensible." They took out a second mortgage for Chloe's tuition and downtown apartment. I worked 3 jobs, lived on ramen, and sent money home when I could, hearing the strain in my mother's voice when she talked about the burden of Chloe's living expenses. After graduation, the pattern solidified into an unshakable family truth. Chloe floated from one creative endeavor to another, a jewelry line that lost $10,000, a blog that required a branding consultant, a stint as a wellness influencer that mainly involved my parents funding yoga retreats in Bali. Each venture was launched with fanfare and family capital. Each fizzled out quietly, with the losses absorbed as the cost of nurturing a free spirit. I, meanwhile, entered the world of tech. I started as a junior developer at a startup, working 80-hour weeks for peanuts and equity that everyone, including me, thought was worthless. I lived in a shoebox apartment in Brooklyn with 2 roommates. My life a cycle of code, coffee, and silent resentment during weekly family calls where Chloe's latest vision was dissected with earnest attention. The turning point, the moment the live coal of my secret began to glow, was 3 years ago, at Christmas. We were all crammed into my parents' living room, the air thick with the smell of pine and simmering tension. Chloe had just announced her latest project, a lifestyle podcast about authentic living. She needed funding for professional equipment, a studio lease, and a marketing budget. The number she floated was $50,000. My father, looking older and more tired than I'd ever seen him, had rubbed his forehead and said, "Chloe, sweetheart, we just don't have that kind of liquidity right now. The home equity line is maxed out." Chloe's face had crumpled, not in understanding, but in betrayal. "So what, my art just dies? Because you can't support your own daughter's dream? Alex gets to have her boring tech job and her independence, and I'm just supposed to what? Get a job at a coffee shop." She'd spat the words "boring tech job" like a curse. My mother had shot me a look, a desperate, imploring look. "Alex, honey, you're doing so well. You have that good job. Could you possibly help? Just a loan? For your sister?" The request hung in the air. I looked at their faces, Chloe's entitled pout, my mother's anxious plea, my father's weary avoidance. I thought of my own bank account, the slow but steady growth of my savings, the mountain of my own student loans I was still chipping away at alone. I thought of the $20 I'd sent Mom last month when she'd casually mentioned the car needed new tires. "No," I'd said, the word clear and flat in the festive room. "I can't." The fallout was instant and vicious. Chloe had screamed that I was a selfish, jealous witch. My mother had cried. My father had told me I lacked family loyalty. I left that night, the echoes of their disappointment ringing in my ears, and I made a silent vow. I would never again ask them for anything. I would never again seek their approval. I would build a world so solid, so magnificent, that their neglect would become their own shame. I threw myself into work with a furious intensity. The startup I'd bet on, a fledgling company in the competitive world of artificial intelligence logistics, began to gain traction. My equity, once a joke, started to acquire real, breathtaking value. I led a critical project that landed us a major defense contract. When the company was acquired 18 months later, my stake translated into a sum of money so large it felt abstract. A number in an account that bore no relation to the girl who had saved lunch money for a calculator. I didn't tell a soul. Not my friends, who knew I'd sold my equity but had no idea of the scale. Certainly not my family, who believed I'd received a nice little bonus and had moved to a better apartment. They had no frame of reference for my reality. Their universe still revolved around Chloe's latest Instagram post about manifesting abundance. With the money, I did something entirely for myself. I bought a penthouse. Not just any apartment, but a full-floor, pre-war gem on the Upper West Side, with panoramic views of Central Park and the city skyline. It had soaring ceilings, herringbone floors, a library, and a terrace bigger than my first apartment. It was an audacious, almost foolish purchase, the kind of thing Chloe would have fantasized about. But it wasn't a fantasy for me. It was a monument. It was proof. It was my declaration of independence, written in limestone and steel. I moved in quietly, furnishing it slowly, learning the patterns of light in my own private sky. The silence there was different from the silence of being overlooked. It was a rich, peaceful silence, full of potential. I continued to live simply in many ways. No flashy car, no designer wardrobe. The penthouse was my one secret extravagance, my tangible victory. And so, I arrived at Grandma's 80th, a walking secret. The party was the family event of the season. Everyone was there. Aunts, uncles, cousins, family friends who'd witnessed my supporting role for decades. Chloe was, of course, the star of the show. She'd curated the flower arrangements, with my parents' money, and was gushing to anyone who would listen about her podcast's explosive growth, which amounted to a few hundred downloads per episode. She was flanked by our parents, who glowed with vicarious achievement. I circulated, making polite conversation, the ghost at the feast. Uncle Leo, my father's brother, found me by the fern. He was a gruff, kind man who'd always been slightly on the outside himself, running a modest hardware store while the family obsessed over more glamorous pursuits. "How you holding up, kid?" he asked, sipping his scotch. "I'm fine, Uncle Leo. It's a beautiful party." He followed my gaze to where Chloe was now demonstrating a yoga pose to a captive circle of elderly relatives. "Yeah, a real celebration of whatever that is." He sighed. "How's the tech world? Still coding?" "Something like that." I smiled. "You look good, Alex. There's a calm about you, like you've settled into your own skin." His perception startled me. "Thank you. I feel settled." The moment for the family speeches arrived. My father took the microphone, his voice choked with emotion as he praised Grandma, then seamlessly pivoted to praising Chloe, her creativity, her beautiful spirit, her exciting new podcast venture. He spoke of her as the family's brightest light. There was no mention of me. I was part of the anonymous "we" he used when thanking everyone for coming. As he finished, he gestured for Chloe to join him. She took the mic and gave a tearful, theatrical speech about legacy and inspiration, somehow making Grandma's birthday about her own artistic journey. The applause was warm, enveloping. A strange detachment settled over me. The live coal in my chest was white hot. I watched them, this tableau of selective love, and I felt nothing but a vast, clear emptiness. The need for their approval had finally burned itself out. As the speeches ended and the crowd dissolved back into chatter, I found myself near the center of the room, surrounded by a knot of aunts and cousins. The conversation turned, as it always did, to Chloe. Aunt Susan was gushing about the podcast. "It's just so authentic, Chloe. You have such a gift. Where do you record? It sounds so professional." Chloe preened. "Oh, I've rented this adorable little studio in Soho. It's tiny, but the acoustics are amazing. It's such an investment, but you have to spend money to make money, right?" My mother nodded vigorously. "It's a crucial step for her brand. We're so proud of her commitment." Then, Aunt Susan turned to me, her expression politely curious. "And Alex, dear? Still in that same apartment in, where was it?" "Bushwick. Williamsburg," I corrected softly. "Actually, I moved recently." "Oh." My mother's interest was perfunctory. "A nicer building, I hope." That last place sounded dreadful. "It's a bit of an upgrade," I said, taking a small sip of my sparkling water. The room seemed to slow down. The live coal was rising in my throat. I didn't plan the words. They simply fell out, calm and clear, as casual as commenting on the weather. "I bought a place. A penthouse, actually, on Central Park West." The effect was not immediate. There was a beat of silence, a collective processing of syllables that didn't compute. "A what?" my father asked, his smile frozen. "A penthouse. On Central Park West. It's a full floor. The views are incredible, especially at sunrise." My voice was still calm, almost conversational. Chloe's laugh cut through the silence, a sharp, brittle sound. "Oh my God, Alex. A penthouse. Did you win the lottery or something? Or is this some kind of sad fantasy?" She looked around, seeking allies in her derision. "No lottery," I said, meeting her eyes. "The startup I worked for was acquired. My equity did quite well." "Equity?" my father echoed, the financial term landing with a thud. "What? How much equity?" I named the figure. It was not the full sum, but a fraction large enough to be devastating. The color drained from his face. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. That's impossible," Chloe whispered, her confidence fracturing. "You're a coder. You don't make that kind of money." "Apparently, I do," I said, shrugging slightly. The unraveling was swift and spectacular. Chloe's face contorted, a mask of jealousy and disbelief, so raw it was almost painful to witness. All the years of being the anointed one, the investment, the unquestioned star, they collided with the undeniable, unignorable reality of my success. A success she had never worked for, a success that owed her nothing, a success that rendered her entire identity as the special, one null and void. Her eyes darted around, wild, looking for a weapon. They landed on her nearly full glass of expensive red wine. With a guttural sound that was half sob, half-scream, she drew her arm back and hurled the glass, not at me, but in my general direction. The deep burgundy liquid arced through the air, splashing across the front of my dress, staining the delicate navy fabric of violent purple and splattering onto the pristine white tablecloth beside me. The glass shattered at my feet. The collective gasp of the ballroom was a physical force. The string quartet stopped mid-bar. Every head turned. "You lying bitch," Chloe shrieked, her voice unraveling. "You're making it up. You've always been jealous. You're trying to ruin Grandma's party." I didn't move. I looked down at the wine spreading across the silk, then back up at her. I said nothing. My silence was more powerful than any retort. My mother burst into tears, not of concern for me, but of sheer systemic shock. Her entire worldview, the narrative she had built and nurtured for 3 decades, was imploding. "Why would you do this, Alexandra?" she wailed, her voice strangled. "Why would you provoke her like this? On today of all days. Couldn't you just be happy for your sister?" Her words, the familiar accusation, were the final release. I felt nothing. No anger, no hurt. Just a profound, bone-deep fatigue. It was then, from the edge of the circle, that Uncle Leo spoke. His voice was low, gravelly, and carried an unmistakable weight of decades of observation. He wasn't looking at me or Chloe. He was looking at my parents, at the aunts and uncles, at the whole stunned, complicit family system. He took a long, slow sip of his scotch, shook his head, and said, loud enough for our entire section of the ballroom to hear, "Well, I guess we backed the wrong kid." The sentence landed like a verdict. It was the unspoken truth that had governed our lives, now given voice. It wasn't an apology to me. It was a cold, hard assessment of a bad investment. In that moment, he wasn't my ally. He was a forensic accountant stating a fact. The silence that followed was absolute, deeper than after the thrown wine. My father looked as if he'd been physically struck. My mother's weeping intensified into helpless shuddering. Chloe stared at Uncle Leo, her mouth agape, as if he'd just declared the earth was flat. I finally moved. I reached for a stack of linen napkins from a nearby table and began dabbing calmly at my dress. "I think," I said, my voice still terribly, unnervingly even. "That's my cue to leave. Happy birthday, Grandma." I walked out. I didn't look back. I walked through the ballroom, past the frozen faces of my relatives, past the waiters holding trays of uneaten canapes, out into the glittering lobby of the plaza, and into the waiting New York night. The cool air hit my wine-stained dress. I hailed a cab. "Central Park West," I said. The cab ride was a blur of light and motion. My phone began to vibrate incessantly in my clutch. I didn't look at it. I leaned my head against the window, watching the city I now owned a piece of stream by. When I let myself into my penthouse, the silence welcomed me. I walked to the wall of windows in the living room. The park was a dark sea below, the city a galaxy of lights. I looked at the reflection in the glass, a woman in a ruined dress, standing alone in a magnificent, empty space. I saw no triumph in her face, only a profound, unshakable peace. The fallout, as I learned over the following days and weeks, was nuclear. The family group chat exploded. Messages ranged from furious, from Chloe and my parents, to bewildered to cautiously congratulatory. Uncle Leo's comment became the defining quote, repeated and dissected. It forced a long overdue audit of family loyalties. My parents called, their voices alternating between anger, guilt, and a desperate attempt to recast the narrative. "Why didn't you tell us?" my father asked, his tone accusing. "We could have helped you manage the money." "You never asked," I replied. "You were busy managing Chloe's." My mother tried the emotional route. "Do you have any idea how humiliated Chloe is? How could you be so callous? She's fragile. She's 30 years old, Mom," I said. "And her fragility has been your life's work. I'm done contributing to it." I stopped taking their calls. I let the lawyers and financial advisors I'd hired handle the sudden, awkward inquiries from relatives looking for investment advice or loans for promising ventures. I built a moat around my new life with clear, firm boundaries. Chloe's podcast episode the following week was titled Navigating Family Jealousy and Toxic Energy. It was her most downloaded episode ever. The irony was not lost on me. The true turning point came 2 months later. I received a handwritten letter from my grandmother. Her handwriting was shaky but precise. "Alexandra, I am an old woman, and I have seen much. At my party, I saw something I wish I had seen earlier. I saw a granddaughter who has built herself a fortress while no one was watching. I saw a family that was too busy admiring a glittering facade to notice the steel being forged in the quiet. I am sorry. I got caught up in the noise, too. I like the sparkle. It was easy. You were always harder to see because you didn't demand to be seen. That was my failure, not yours. I would very much like to see your fortress, if you would have me. With love, Grandma. I cried then, for the first time since the party. Not the hot, angry tears of childhood, but the deep, cleansing tears of a truth finally acknowledged. I invited her for tea. She came, leaning on a cane, her eyes wide as she took in the soaring space, the view, the quiet majesty of the home I'd built. We sat on the terrace, wrapped in blankets, drinking Earl Grey as the sun set over the park. You did this all yourself, she said, not a question. I did, and you never bragged. You never demanded. I learned it was pointless, I said softly. She reached over and took my hand, her skin papery and warm. The loudest bird gets the seed, she said, but the quiet one learns to hunt. You hunted well, my dear. I am so very proud of you. Those words, from her, were worth more than the penthouse. They were the acknowledgement I had stopped waiting for. They didn't fix the past, but they soothed an ancient ache. The rest of the family remains a work in progress. My parents are still struggling, trapped between their ingrained patterns and the new, uncomfortable reality where I hold all the power, financial, emotional, and narrative. Chloe and I do not speak. She has become a permanent victim in her own story, and I have no desire to make a guest appearance. But I have peace. I have my sunrise views. I have a grandmother who sees me. And I have the unshakable knowledge that I was never the wrong kid. I was just the kid they were wrong about. Did you ever feel overlooked in your family? Share your thoughts. Like, share, and subscribe for more stories of quiet victories.